Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new Alpha Female workshop. For the month of August, we have an incredible guest. I'm Michaela Ayan of Sony's Alpha Universe and Sony Alpha Female, and I'm just really excited to have this great opportunity to bring these amazing instructors, speakers, teachers, authors to you every month. And it's no different this month. We have a really incredible guest, our artisan of imagery and multi-hyphenate, India Beal. She is a creator who combines photography and fine art with social justice causes to create some amazing work. And I will let her tell you a little bit more about herself in just a second, because I know that's why you're here. You're here to meet her and you're here to learn about how to fund your passion project. It's something that's obviously very important to us with the Alpha Female Grant. That's one of the ways in which you could do it. So, as a quick reminder, we are in the middle of the grant right now, the eighth grant, not the eighth, sorry, the fourth grant. And we still have some time to go until the deadline for this month. That's going to be September 5th. So get your projects ready, get your applications ready, and submit them. You still have 8 grants to go, 8 opportunities to win the funds in order to fund your passion project. So there is no better time than right now, and you have nothing to lose. And India is going to tell us more about that. So let's bring her on. Welcome, India.
Hi, thank you so much, Michaela. It is such an honor to be here with this amazing group and to talk about funding your personal projects.
I'm so excited you're here. Thank you so much. I just want to say very quickly, when I first met you, it was the first time that I met you. You were on stage at an event and you were delivering a really incredible presentation. And I was just struck. I just sat there and just watched the whole thing. And it was just so incredible. And I'm like, I gotta meet India. And the rest is history. But yeah, really, really excited to have you here. You have a wealth of knowledge and so much to share, and our community is going to really get a ton of it. So I will just let you take it away, and then we'll meet again for questions, which everyone should ask as we go along, because India will answer them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michaela. Um, Hello, everyone. Again, my name is India Beal. I am coming live from North Carolina. I'm so excited to talk to you all about funding your passion, your personal projects. I'm at a time, I think, when we are all in flux, thinking about our voice, thinking about our content, and even our business and practice as photographers. Grants are one of the ways in which we can fund our practice. And so we're going to go deep dive into funding your practice, funding your personal project. And so I guess we'll go with the first slide. I'm going to show you a little bit about my work so you get an idea of what I do. And then we're going to go deep into what it means to fund your passion project, what it means to think about the content, your practice, your brand, and thinking about really, in all honesty, how do you get that off the ground and really into your audience's hands. All right, so to get things started, again, my name is India Beal. And this is me. So like I said, I am a North Carolina-based artist, author, curator. Many of my works live in museums, and a lot of the grants that I fund actually make my personal projects come to life. I just published my first book, Performance Review, and we'll talk about that a little bit in detail because that book was also partially grant funded. My work talks about women of color within corporate spaces. I'm interested in the unseen, the unheard, communities that are voiceless, that haven't had an opportunity or a platform to have their voices heard and seen. And so my work has this mixture. It merges fine arts with social justice. For the past 10 years, I've focused on women of color within corporate spaces, thinking about how you navigate this space, these corporate areas, these workspaces that in many ways were never designed for women of color to thrive in the first place. And so for the past 10 years, I've explored this idea of being a woman, a person of color at your job. So the first body of work I'm going to show you in just a few photographs is the Am I What You're Looking For series. In this series, I photograph young women across North Carolina in the home they grew up in. Now, many of these women were my students at Winston-Salem State University, which is a historically Black college or university. And many people ask me, well, what is an HBCU? An HBCU is a university at one time that was only for people of color when people were not allowed to go to predominantly white institutions. But yes, HBCUs are actually the most diverse, in many ways, universities that exist. Now, the women in the photographs were my students. They would come to me to talk about not their classes or their academics, but to talk about their interviews. You see, many of them were graduating and they were going into their jobs. And they said, Professor Beal, I went to this interview and someone asked me, do I always wear my hair that way? Or I went to this interview and someone asked me, how many children do you have and how old are they? Or I went to this interview and someone said, you speak so articulate. Can you tell me why you speak so well? And so for me, I was thinking about not only the experiences of bias, prejudice, and racism that can happen within an interview process, but more importantly, my students who just gotten this kind of new experience of going to interviews and having to deal with the things that my mother went through or my grandmother went through. So this is the Am I What You're Looking For series. This is Sabrina and Katrina. They're actually standing in front of an office backdrop in their home. The reason I photographed them in their home is because these women are not models. I wanted them to feel comfortable. And so being at home and thinking about what it means to be a professional, what does it mean to dress a certain way? And so I wanted them to pretend they were preparing for their interview. How would you feel in that moment? And as you can see, each woman had a different kind of idea of professionalism and how they wanted to be supported, but most importantly, how they wanted to be seen. And here's a photograph of Melanie. Now, this is Keandra and her sister, Shakia. Now, this project was funded through the Magnum Foundation, which is a foundation that funds a lot of social justice projects. This grant was $10,000. It allowed me to travel across North Carolina, so it covered the gas to get to all these amazing homes from little towns I'd never heard of to larger places. It allowed me to get gear to photograph them, so lighting, because I was photographing many of the women in their home, the backdrop, food, lodging if I had to stay overnight. Let's say I was traveling 4 hours away. So that $10,000 allowed me to cover in the whole body of work, and we'll talk about bodies of work in more detail. There were 30 photographs in all. Now, all of this work, Performance Review, came together in my book, Performance Review, which came out in November of 2020. The book and the last 15 photographs were funded through the Open Society Foundation, another foundation that also covers social justice projects, really focusing on identity, focusing on stories that had not been told, giving a platform to individuals who, like I said, may not necessarily have a voice. Now, the Open Society grant was $30,000. This allowed me to buy additional gear. It allowed me to do videos, and it also allowed me to put some of that funding towards my book. And so we're going to talk about this, and also when we think about the Am I What You're Looking For project and even Performance Review, that was about $40,000 in all to make this happen. And this was a personal project. So we'll talk about this more in detail in terms of how to create a body of work. What are things to ask for when you're applying for a grant, right? Is it wanting to fund a book? Thinking about how to cover travel to do projects, how to get the gear that you need in order to make those things happen. And so we're going to go more in depth, and we're actually going to start off generally talking about your proposal, and we're going to take breaks throughout to answer any questions that you all have. All right, so let's get into it, and we're going to start with generally how to write your proposal, thinking about your ideas, how do you make it all come together? All right, so I'm going to go to the next slide. Now, when we start thinking about writing our proposal, when we think about putting all these things together, one of the things I want you all to consider is reading all the questions. And this may sound very basic, but it's something that we don't always do. We have to really follow those application guidelines and answering all the questions. I can't tell you how many times I have been as a juror or with a granting organization myself, and we see this amazing application, but then the person forgets to put their letters of recommendation, or they forget to add their budget. And I think sometimes we get so overwhelmed thinking about a grant that we don't read everything thoroughly. And so I would say the first thing that you want to do is begin early. So you don't want to be a procrastinator, right? And you want to make sure you answer all the questions, read everything before you even begin. Now, when we're thinking about our actual proposal, these ideas that we want to come up with, it's always good to be clear, concise, and specific. All right. And I use the analogy of a cookbook, or even like the scientific method, if you guys know what I'm talking about. Like with a cookbook, you might say, well, first, I'm going to get a bowl. Secondly, I'm going to break 3 eggs in the bowl. Third, I'm going to scramble these eggs, literally step by step by step. And that's what granting organizations are looking for. Sometimes we want to add all of this, amazing language, and we want to sound smart, and it doesn't work, right? It really doesn't. They want you to be clear, concise. First, I'm going to travel North Carolina and photograph women in different homes. Secondly, I'm going to go into these areas. I'm going to tell these stories. Lastly, I'm going to do this. So making sure that you're clear, you're concise, and you're specific about exactly what you're going to do. Imagine if a granting organization is looking at 500 applications and they're reading all of these applications. What they want to do is make sure when they get to yours, they don't have to search for what you're trying to do. They want to know that it's at the very beginning. In many ways, it's beneficial to even repeat the sentence. What do you want to do? I want to do this. Literally as your first sentence in your proposal. So that way the person who's reading all these applications won't get tired and say, okay, I know what India wants to do. I can see that at the very beginning of her proposal is clear, it's concise, it's specific. One of the things we also want to consider is being realistic about our timeline, thinking about how long it's going to take us to do something. A lot of times we want to do everything. But with grants, less is more, right? Thinking about how you can hit those targets, those things you really want to do, and move forward with the next thing without over cramming your grant to do all these things that maybe you don't have enough time to do in the allotted time that is given. And so lastly, like I said, follow the application guidelines. I repeat this because so many times we forget, right? We're moving fast, we're trying to get all our papers together, and we may miss something. So rereading those guidelines again and again to make sure you have everything you need in order to make sure that your grant is successful. All right, so we're going to move to the next slide. Now, in actually writing your proposal, this is going to be literally, if it's a photography grant, this is like 50% of the application, because this is actually telling people what you want to do. So you're going to think about goals, aims, outcomes. What do you want people to learn from your proposal? When I created that Am I What You're Looking For series, I was interested in telling the stories of young Black women who are going into the corporate space, right? That's it, just that one sentence. That was my elevator pitch sentence of our proposal. And then I started to expound upon that one sentence, right? And so I think it's always nice to write down literally a 2-sentence summary of exactly what you want to do. And if you have difficulty writing that 2-sentence summary, then that means that maybe you have to go back to the drawing board and think about, well, how can I tailor my idea so that it's clear, concise, and specific? And thinking about later what your goals, your aims, and outcomes are going to be. But really, I would say draft a 2 to 3 sentence first summary of exactly what you want to do, get it out on paper, and then think about how you can build upon those things in order to tell the story of your passion project. All right, we're going to go to the next slide. Now, this one's also very important. Why should we care? Why do people need to know this? And I think sometimes we underestimate the importance of this particular question. We talk about things generally, right? Like, oh, I want to talk about, let's say if I said, I want to talk about corporate spaces. Well, why do people care about corporate spaces? Like, what about that is exciting or intriguing or personal? For me, when I create my own ideas, when I think about my work, I say, well, what kind of risk am I taking? And if I'm not taking a risk in my passion project or my personal project, then I ask myself, well, why am I doing it? Why is it worth knowing? Why should people care about why I'm doing this particular thing? And I found that the more specific you are in your ideas, the more likely that it's going to be funded, right? So I'll give an example. I like music. I'm actually a hip hop head. And so Kanye West, whether you love him or not, right? He came out with his first album, College Dropout. And his album was literally about dropping out of college. And I think everybody at one time in their academic career may have thought about dropping out of college, right? But the idea is that he decided to be specific, talking about what it felt to him, like what it meant for him to have to go through that experience of thinking about college. And so when you're thinking about your personal projects, being specific is the way in order to reach other people, because it's so specific, it transfers and translates to other individuals. So when you're thinking about your proposal, try not to be general, right, in your ideas. Be specific and take risk in your proposal while you're drafting it in order to really hone in on your goals, your aims, and your outcomes. And please, if you have any questions, we're going to talk about this as we move forward. All right, so the last point is, how will you measure success? So you've done this project, it's amazing, people are loving it, but how do you measure the success of the project? What are ways and what are your criteria for measuring success? Is it an exhibition? Once my project is over, I'm going to create this exhibition that will live so that other people can have access to this. In order for me to measure the success, I want other people to see the work that I'm making in this particular space, because I know my voice is limited in the museum. That's one way to measure the success. Or you can say, you know what, after this, I'm going to have a lecture or maybe an Instagram live where I'm talking about this project to garner more feedback about how I'm going to measure the success of my project. So maybe it's the exhibition that allows you to help measure the success of it. You're kind of capping it off that way. And so we can talk more about how do you measure the success and what criteria are you setting for yourself in order to market, but also to put it out there once you've created this project. You have to understand with granting organizations, they're giving you funding, but they want something back in return, right? They want you to be successful, and they want to be able to promote the success of the program, but more importantly, promote the success of you. And so measuring that success is going to be helpful for the organization to talk about how it was impactful in the communities that you decided or the area you decided to photograph. And I'm saying a whole lot. And so when we get to the questions, like I said, I want to be able to answer all the questions that you guys have as we move forward. We're going to cover a lot of information in a short amount of time. And so, like I said, we want to make sure we can answer those questions. All right, so we're going to go to the next part, which is a quote that I really love. And again, it's just reiterating those thoughts about being clear, concise, and articulate, right? What do you want to do? Where do you want to go? And who do you want to respond to the work that you're making? And so again, thinking about these ideas of being clear and concise are going to help your proposals be as successful as you want them to be. All right, so we're going to take a little break and answer some questions for you guys, because I know I gave you a lot of information, but I want to make sure that you all are following and that I can provide any guidance. That's why I'm here as possible.
Well, this is a masterclass. I am just loving this so much, India, because it's like, yes, all of this, everything she said. We have 2 grants going on right now. We have the Alpha Female Grant and we have the Create Action Grant for organizations, for nonprofit organizations. And what you said about making sure everything is included is just such a critical point, because I've been in that situation where I found an application that I loved and then something was missing from it, or the video was private, or something wasn't working. Yeah. It was like, oh, got it disqualified. No. And it's just so important. Like, organize yourself. This is great. So loving all of this advice. Follow this advice for alpha female, and you will be in the running for real. Okay. So let's see some questions. Everyone, you can ask your questions if you're on alphauniverse.com right now. There's a little question mark. You can ask them there. If you're on YouTube, you can ask them there as well. We have someone who's making sure that we're answering them. So let's start with this question from Jamie or Jaime, either one. I haven't thought about my fine art practice as a brand. Any tips for someone honing in on what their brand is?
Totally. I would say that thinking about, so any practice, whether it's fine arts, commercial, fashion, wedding photography, you are a brand, right? And so I would say in the beginning, thinking about your practice, I would actually write down what your mission is. Just like if you were a part of an organization, thinking about what is you want to say with your work. Because all photographers, I would say, are storytellers. We're creating narratives. We're showing something new. And so because of that, we want to make sure that we understand what our mission is. What's the mission of of the work we're making? So for me, I was interested in communities of color. I knew that. I was interested in the voices of the unseen and unheard. I realized that in photojournalism and photography, Black people were just limited in terms of the stories that were told about Black folks. And so I said, well, how can I add more stories to the gallery wall by telling other stories outside of the kind of stereotypes that I'd already seen over and over again? And so when I made my mission, I said, my mission is to create narratives that talk about human experiences that focus specifically on communities of color, right? And so that was my mission. Then my vision, what is my vision of that? And so literally you want to think about your brand and start at the very beginning, writing down what your mission is and what your vision is. And you'll find that if you know those things, applying for a grant becomes a little easier, because it says, well, what is, why now? Why should we give you this money now? And you'll say, oh, well, my mission was to do this. You can go back to that and say, well, my mission was to help communities of color. Well, now because I think communities of color need help, right? In terms of visual imagery and telling different stories. And so I would say literally on a piece of paper, just like this, right? Write down your mission, write down your vision of yourself. Where do you want to be in the next 5 years? Where do you want your work to live? Do you want to be at the MoMA if you're a fine art photographer? Or do you want to be on the cover of National Geographic if you are a photojournalist? I'm a strong believer that you have to speak things into existence, literally writing things into existence. And so write that down so that when you're applying for your grants or telling people about your work, in the back of your mind, you know exactly what your mission and vision is for your practice. And just start with that. And trust me, everything else will fall into place.
I love it. I'm such a huge believer in that too. And in like actually putting it down on paper is just such an important thing. So that's really great advice. So speaking of putting things down on paper, one of the things that I hear a lot from our contestants, applicants, is that, well, I'm not really good at writing. I don't really, this isn't my forte. I don't know how to do this. What if I can't write it properly? And what would be your advice for someone who is afraid of writing?
So I would say my dad used to say practice makes permanent, right? Not practice makes perfect, because he didn't believe in that. He said practice makes permanent. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. But I would say that with grant writing in particular, like I always have someone who edits my grants. Like I may start writing it, but then I'll have someone who edits it. And trust me, the person isn't like, my husband or like my baby daddy, right? Those are the individuals who are editing my grants. I'm literally finding someone who is smarter than me, right? Where I actually like their writing too. And I'm getting them to look at it. You don't have to think about your grants as something you're doing solo, right? Like you have to do all by yourself. You can literally have someone edit your grants, look over it. Even sometimes the granting organization has key point people who are designated to help people with their grants. Literally, that's what they're getting paid for. So you can reach out to the grants organization. We'll talk about that as well in terms of reaching out. If there is a designated point person for that grant who can answer any questions. And sometimes you can have them actually look at your grant proposal, and they're going to give you feedback and say, you know what, this is great, this isn't great, you should take this out, right? And they're there to help you make your grant better. And it's important to build those relationships with the granting organization, because in all honesty, it is a relationship. And so we're going to talk about that as well. But I would say don't be afraid to reach out to people, to ask them to review your proposal. Don't be afraid to reach out to the granting organization if they have a key person who is designated to answer your questions, because that's what they're there for.
That's excellent advice. There's another component, India, in our alpha female application, as you know, and that's the video. So a lot of people have a lot to say about the video as well. The individual, the personal video is a bit of a stress for a lot of people. So I have a question about that here from O'Hara. I feel a little stressed about the video component, not entirely sure how to approach it to make it an asset to my application rather than a hindrance. So how do you approach a personal video in an application?
Right. So one of the things you want to think about is just think about, first of all, the production of the video. So there again, if you are not a savvy videographer, or if you're not really good when it comes to lighting, that's when you want to use your resources. Getting key people to help you light it and make sure that the audio is good, because you don't want to do a video and they can barely see you or they can barely hear you. So thinking about making sure the production quality of your video is the best it can be. I would say secondly, just kind of being yourself. You want to tell people things that they don't see in your work. You want to tell people things that they may not see on your application. So thinking about the best ways to talk about your project, but being as natural and honest and polite as possible in talking about your work. You know, literally being clear and concise, just like you were in your proposal, but making sure you're clear and concise in your video. So I would think, first of all, thinking about the production, get key people to help you and make your video quality better. And then secondly, making sure that you're able to be clear and concise and natural, being yourself and talking about the work that you're trying to pursue.
I love your dad's advice about practice makes permanent. Yeah. I think I'm going to use that from now on. It's really good. If you remember, we had a workshop with Brooke Shaden a couple months ago, you know very well. And one of the things she said was, just record a video, a 1-minute video every day. Just do it. Like, see what happens, because after a while, it's just going to come more naturally to you, and it's not going to be so stressful anymore because you've just done it over and over. So I like that idea for practice. Awesome. Well, let's go to the next section. I'm sure there will be more questions. Everyone, for the questions you have submitted about the alpha female application or the process, I am happy to answer them at the end. So stick around, and then we'll address all of those. And please continue to ask India questions so that we can just pick her brain while we have her.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to go to the next slide. And we're going to get into photographs for your proposal. So when I said that, a lot of times the proposal itself, the written part, is 50%. I would say that in photography grants, your photographs are 75%. Granted, that does not equal 100, but your photographs are going to be a large portion of the reasons why people are actually going to read your proposal, why they're going to go through it. They're going to look at your imagery. They're going to look at the photographs that you are taking. Now, my first tip, and these are general tips, so we can dive deep when we get into the question and answer segment, but you want to think about creating a body of work. Now, when I talk about bodies of work, again, I like to use hip hop analogies. So imagine if you're dropping your first album, right? Like your first EP, and you had to create this body of work in the album. And let's say your album's about love, okay? So every photograph in that body of work is going to have something to do with love. Just like if someone was creating their first album, literally every track has something to do with love in different ways. So when you're creating your body of work, you literally want it to feel concise. You want it to feel connected to one another. And I'm not saying literally repeating the same photograph, but showing just different aspects of the theme that you have discussed in your proposal. And so that's a body of work. So I showed you earlier, Am I What You're Looking For? You saw that it was different women in different homes, but it all had this umbrella theme of corporate identity, right? Corporate spaces. And so really, we want to see that you can create a body of work. So what we don't want to see is you showing all your best talent, literally flowers and beach scenes and wedding photography and your dog that you took a picture of last week. Like, we don't need to see all that. We literally want to see a body of work, all concise, and has something to do with your proposal in some way. Now, when I say in some way, you may be proposing to do something different, right? That you've never done before. And you'll say, well, India, I want to do something different that's outside of my normal realm of photography. What I would say is that make sure the photographs in your proposal, though they don't have to be exactly what you're proposing, they do need to have the same kind of tone or message or idea so that the granting organization can look at your application and say, you know what? She knows what she's doing. She did this project so well, I know we can give her this money to do something else, right? So literally thinking about a body of work that is all connected to one another. We're not looking for your best shots all across the country. We're looking for something that feels connected, that feels whole. Think about it as your first album that you're releasing, how to create a body of work. And I'm doing my hands like this so you can see literally a body of work that has something to do in some way with the proposal that you've submitted. All right, so we're going to go to the next slide. All right, so the next thing we want to think about is your edit. So a lot of times when you're putting a body of work together, you may have to consider the edit of that body of work. And, when I'm editing my work and thinking about which photographs to select, again, I don't go to my husband. He's a lawyer. He doesn't know anything about photography. I don't go to my neighbor down the street who loves my work, who knows nothing about photography. These are people who are not your go-tos, right? Like, I would say go to a photo editor if you know one, right? Go to a pro photographer if you know one. Go to someone who can look at narratives and create a narrative with the photographs that you have selected, right? You want to make sure that your edit makes sense, that you're starting with some of your strongest photographs and you're ending with some of your strongest photographs, and it feels connected to one another. And so when you're thinking about your body of work, when you're thinking about your proposal, literally your go-tos are going to be people that, like I said, who are maybe smarter than you or know more than you, or you admire them, or you admire the work they're making, or they can help you because they believe in what you're trying to do and they have the knowledge to make sure that you're successful. So that's something to consider. All right, so we're going to go to the next one. Same one. All right, so another thing you want to do is reach out to the granting organization if you have questions. I cannot stress this enough. When I'm a panelist or when I'm sitting, as a judge, and we're all sitting together trying to figure out if we're going to give this person $100,000 to do their proposal, the first question everybody asks is, do you know so-and-so? Are you familiar with their work? Have you seen their work before? And that's the question that everybody's going to ask initially. And if everybody on the panel says no, then they're going to be less likely in many ways to fund it, especially if the work isn't as strong as it needs to be. And that's why I say if there's a contact person for the granting organization, reach out to that person, because believe it or not, they're going to be in the room. When the granting organization is deciding on who they want to fund, this person may be there. This person may be the person you can talk to. So again, reaching out to them is not only an opportunity to ask questions, but it's also an opportunity to introduce yourself, to let them know that you're invested. There's some granting organizations that have informational sessions. Go to them. right? Even if you feel like you have all the questions and all the answers to those questions, go to the granting organization's informational sessions so you can learn as much as you can and you can introduce yourself, because like I said, that person's in the room for the panelists to give them any additional information they need about the applicants. So I can't stress that enough. If there is a key person, contact them. If there's not, then, you know, like I said, practice makes permanent. You'll just have to kind of try to get into some, because some granting organizations don't have key contact people. So if there is someone there who can answer your questions, I highly advise reaching out to them just for your own network, but more importantly, to make sure that you have everything you need to make your application successful. All right, so we're going to go to the next one. And this is a quote that I actually love. You know, Chelsea's talking about submitting that body of work, right? And what it means to submit an idea or a photograph that actually makes sense. And she's an editor for the New York Times. And again, I can't stress this importance of bodies of work, not your greatest hits. Literally, they want to see a body of work that makes sense. And those are the applications that are going to rise to the top. All right, so there again, we're going to take a little break. Any questions you guys have about bodies of work and thinking about how to make your photographs the most successful in terms of your applications?
So there is indeed a big question here. We get this a lot for the Alpha Female Grant, India. And that question is, well, what happens if I don't actually have any photos that I've ever taken in the vein of the ones that I'm proposing for the grant? And, you know, it stands to reason that for a personal project, it's possible that you've thought of something that you haven't done before. That's why you need the funding. How would you deal with that part?
So like I said, you don't have to have, it doesn't have to be identical. So let's say you want to shoot dogs, but you've been doing you know, cats for all your life, right? But you want to do these portraits of these dogs. In your proposal, you can talk about that. You can say, you know, my whole life I've been photographing cats, and I created these images that talk about, so you're talking about what you've submitted and how you successfully executed these portraits of cats. And now you want to switch to dogs, right? And you want to do something different. What the granting organization is ideally looking for is that, can you execute a proposal? Can you execute a project? It doesn't have to be a direct reflection. That's what I'm saying. Like, your photographs that you submit don't have to directly reflect what you want to do, but it has to lend itself to an idea that you can execute exactly what you're asking for, right? So for instance, if you want to do portraits of individuals and you submit, you know, a lot of seascapes or a lot of landscape portraits, then talk about that in your proposal. You know, I've spent a lot of time photographing nature. I spent a lot of time photographing places, but now I'm interested in the individuals that inhabit these spaces. I'm interested in discovering the individuals that make community. And so for the granting organization, they're like, oh, well, these landscape, you know, these landscape photographs are beautiful. I know this person can do this. So it doesn't have to be, like I said, a direct reflection of what you're doing. Your photographs don't have to necessarily look exactly the same way, but it has to have the same tone and idea, and making sure you address that in your proposal so that it's clear to the organization that you are in transition for a new idea and maybe a new experience in your practice.
That's really great advice. Let's take that further to another scenario. And that scenario is, what if I'm just starting out as a photographer? I haven't really had an opportunity to create a ton of work, but I'm really passionate. I really want to do this for the rest of my life, and I would really love some funding to get it going. How would you approach that?
Well, I think it all depends on the grant that you're applying for, but I would say that, you know, if you're applying for a photography grant, they want to see some idea of what you've been doing for the past couple of years. And so if you don't have exactly a body of work that you've been working on or something to submit in that nature, Michaela, I just want to make sure I have the question exact. I would just say, take the time to build it. So for instance, I decided that I wanted to go to Yale for grad school, but I knew that I needed to create 2 bodies of work in order to submit my application for their program. And so I took some time to build another body of work. And I literally spent maybe a summer, so I would say 3 months, shooting this new body of work just so I had something to submit for my application for grad school. So again, sometimes it's about stepping back, thinking about that timeline. Remember, I was talking about the timeline in your practice, and saying, okay, maybe I need to set some time aside to create the photographs I need in order to make my application as successful as possible. And that's okay. I hope I answered the question. Yeah.
You did, yes. And that is excellent advice. I think a lot of people are waiting for something to happen in order to create, but the reality is you just need to create in order for something to happen, right?
Yeah,
so,
that's it.
Yeah, really, really great advice. Thank you. Final question for this section. Someone who is doing video, who's a filmmaker, do you have any suggestion on how they could put together a reel that doesn't look like random clips because they've shot many different things?
So I would say that if like, and I do video work as well, in terms of my own practice. And I would say that when you're applying for grants and you're creating, a reel, sometimes the grant will say they want to see a single video, and sometimes the grant will say they want to see multiple videos. I always believe that less is more. And so you may want to select 2 different films or 2 different shorts or whatever you're doing, and maybe have a break in between so that the granting organization clearly knows that these are 2 separate bodies of work. And you also want to address that in your proposal so they know they're looking at 2 different things. This is a prime example. I applied for a grant, and I did a video about women of color at work. But I wanted to do something a little different, and I submitted just a single video. It was 3 minutes, and I submitted it to create another video that was a little different but similar in terms of tonality and idea and metaphor. And I submitted this video for this grant. Now, this grant was $10,000. This is a separate grant, and I ended up getting 2nd place. And the reason I know is because I called the organization when I didn't get it, and I was like, well, what happened? Because granting organizations will give you feedback. Sometimes the panelists will actually give you feedback about your application. I always say follow up if you don't get it, just to see if there's feedback available. And so I got this feedback, and they were like, well, you were 2nd runner up, which is not what you want to hear, okay? And they said, you can get the grant if the other person chooses not to accept the $10,000. And I bust out laughing, right? Like, I was just like, okay, I doubt they'll be like, no, don't give me this money. But the next year I applied, I realized that I needed more. And so I applied the next year, and I actually did a different short film, and I applied for the same grant, and I got it the next year. So I say all this to say is that with films, less is more. I wouldn't try to squeeze so much in it, and don't make it so long. Like I've been on grants where people give us like 20 minutes worth of film, and nobody's looking at that, right? So less is more. Show the best part of whatever you're trying to put in your proposal, and know people are going to see that, and they'll make an ultimate decision in terms of your application. I hope I answered your question.
You did, and that's a great story as well. And it's also about perseverance, right? That's the lesson there.
Totally,
very
100%.
Very cool. Okay. Let's go to the next section.
All right, let's keep it going. And like I said, if there's any questions, please let me know. Here. All right, so letters of recommendation. Now, sometimes a granting organization may ask for letters of recommendation. Okay, and sometimes they're just references. And really, they just want to know that you have key people in your life that, believe in your work and can speak highly of you. And so these are just some kind of general things to think about if you're looking for grants that have letters of recommendation. I would say make sure you reach out to that person no less than 3 weeks in advance. The worst thing in the world is to get an email from someone that you love who is asking you to write a letter of recommendation in 2 days, right? People have lives, children. I have 2 kids of my own. We're busy, right? And so people want to have the time to give you the kind of care that is needed in making sure your application is successful. So I would say literally, give them at least a month, like plant the seed and say, hey, listen, I would love this letter of recommendation from you, making sure that you ask in advance. I would say also asking in a professional manner. That means don't send me a message on Instagram. Don't send me a text message on my phone, right? Like literally draft an email and say, hey, listen, I'm applying for this grant. I want to know if you'd be interested in writing this letter of recommendation for me. Please let me know, right? So all of that is going to be, when I say professional manner, unfortunately, text messages and Instagram and Facebook Messenger are they're just not the way you want to go. Also, making sure you ask people who are familiar with your work, right? Like they know your work. They've supported you over the years. Like you want to make sure that those people can offer you detailed accounts. So don't be just like, India is great. They're like, no, I met India during her graduate studies at Yale. She did this particular body of work. I was moved by this. So the letter of recommendation is personal, and that's going to be really important for your application. And then another thing that you want to do is, let people know what happened, right? Be specific about your timeline in terms of the letter of recommendation, but also letting the granting person, or not the granting person, letting the person who's writing the letter know what happened. I mean, I've actually sent flowers to people. I've did handwritten notes, like, just thank you so much. I appreciate you for taking the time, even if I didn't get the grant. Because you're building a relationship, you're building a network. And I would say that generally speaking, if you have an opportunity and someone does something special for you, send a letter. I've had editors, when the New York Times covered my work or when National Geographic covered my work and the person wrote about it, I sent them an email afterwards. I was like, hey, listen, thank you so much. The article was beautifully written. I truly appreciate it. And you'll be surprised how far a thank you goes, because that person may leave National Geographic and go to the Huffington Post and say, hey, listen, what are you working on? I love to cover you for the Post. Or, hey, I'm with the New Yorker now. What are you working on? You'll realize that editors and producers, especially if you're doing commercial or photojournalists, literally, and even art, everybody knows everybody. And so you want to make sure. So I would say not only for letters recommendation, but also for any situation, just sending a thank you afterwards just goes a long way. Yeah. All right. So we're going to go to the last and final. I know I've given you all so much information, and hopefully we can answer all the questions. The last thing we're going to talk about is just your budget. Right? And really, in all honesty, thinking about budget is so important, because it's the worst to get this beautiful application with all these great photographs, and then you read this budget and you're like, what? Like, this makes no sense. So I would say with your budget, you want to be as conservative as possible and realistic in terms of what you're trying to do and how long it's going to take you and what resources you need. So when we talk about budget, we're going to cover a few things. Requested funds. So this is how much money you're going to be asking for. Outside contributions. So for instance, you might get a grant for $20,000, but then you have outside contributions of, like, I don't know, maybe you did a Kickstarter and you have $5,000 from that. You may add that into your budget and then your total project. And so we're actually going to go to the next slide, because I think this actually gives just kind of a breakdown. Oops, back. The next slide that gives a little bit of breakdown in terms of what is needed. So when you're thinking about your budget, you're going to talk about personal things. So like, let's say you're paying yourself, right? Like, what does that look like? How much money you're going to pay yourself? Let's say you have bills. Add those bills up and figure out how much you need to pay yourself if that is allowed in the grant. When it comes to travel, I would say include, like, your flights, gas, food. Do not round up. So if food costs $20.20, put $20.20, because what that shows is that you were specific about how much money it was going to take. If you're buying your Sony a7 III, right, and that's what you need in order to make your in order to get your project done, then add the whole amount of what that cost in your application, it's going to be important that the granting organization sees that, okay, yeah, she did her research, she estimated the mileage, she knows exactly what she needs. Even that, and so thinking about camera equipment, things you need in order to make your proposal successful, making your project successful. So be realistic. If you're going to be doing a studio shoot, it makes sense that you're going to need you're going to need lighting. But if in your proposal you're talking about photographing, I don't know, natural landscapes, then someone may say, well, why does she need all of this lighting equipment in order to do this? And so again, you want to make sure you're justifying your budget in your proposal as well. And so that means breaking down equipment and breaking down supplies. And so with this one, I think it's kind of self-explanatory, but again, we're going to open it up for questions to see if you all have any questions about budgets or letters of recommendation. This is actually my last slide. And so I do want to make sure that I answered all your questions in terms of how to create a successful grant application. You know, right now where a lot of photographers across the world are thinking about funding, are thinking about their business and their brand, grants become so critical in making sure that you can execute and bring something to life. And so here is my contact information. We can go to the next slide, actually. And if you all, my contact information, if you all want to contact me, like I said, on Instagram, or you can send me an email, I'm open to answering any questions. You know, as a community, it's important that we support one another. And with Sony, it's a family. And so I'll just end with this. When you apply for a grant, you are literally creating a relationship with that grant. You're creating a relationship with that organization. And so I want you to think about it not as a transaction, but a relationship, because you never know when you may need that granting organization again. And so it's important to stay in contact. It's important to follow up, but it's most importantly to build that relationship with that organization so that you can grow and you all can grow together. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here. I am going to answer any questions you all have. I love you. Be safe out there in the world, and hopefully we'll get to see each other in person. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Well, that was amazing. Thank you. We do have some questions. So the first question related to letters of recommendation, do you pick different references depending on project, or do you have the same go-to people that you ask for references?
It depends. It depends on the grant. So sometimes I do have my go-to people that I know are going to be available to provide letters of recommendation. However, if I'm applying for a specific grant and I know people who either are affiliated or I know the granting organization has funded them before, then I may reach out to them and ask them to write my letters of recommendation because I know the judges will know their work. So here's an example. I was applying to different graduate programs, and I selected people to write my letters of recommendation that I knew had a relationship with those particular universities. And so I reached out to certain artists, certain professors, certain people I knew either went to the school or taught at the school, and I asked them if they write a letter of recommendation for me. And most people say, yeah, sure, as long as you give them enough time in order to do it. So you may have your go-tos for certain grants, but if you know someone at the organization or know someone who's received the grant before, get those folks to write your letters of recommendation because they're going to be more likely to be known from the granting organization because they have a relationship with those individuals. Yeah.
Okay, great advice. Related to budget now, what are some of the things that you do not include in a budget?
Okay, so I would say, you know, when I said be conservative about your budget, these are things you want to consider. So for instance, I've sat on grants before where someone wanted to travel to Italy. But in their proposal, they said nothing about why they needed to be in Italy in order to do it. And so everybody in the organization was like, well, I want a vacation too, right? Like, I want to go to Italy, you know? And so when you're creating your budget, when I say be conservative, make sure that you're realistic about what you're asking for and justify the reason why it's important for you to be in those particular places. So I would say one of the things you want to avoid are asking for things that have nothing to do with your project. Like literally, you know, you're like, I want to shoot this villa in Italy, but you have provided no justification as to why you need to be in Italy and why that villa is important and why anybody should care about that. So it's something to think about. Yeah.
Definitely something to think about. Okay, another question, which I have not seen before, which I think is really great. Samantha's asking, should you put in your budget the making of the project along with promotion and things for after the project is completed so that you make it a success?
So yeah, so if it asks for it, so some grants will ask for what your marketing plan is, right? And how do you plan to market your particular grant? So for instance, when I did the Am I What You're Looking For series, I knew I wanted to exhibit these women and do a traveling exhibition, okay? And I knew that I was printing the photographs 30 by 40, that they were going to be framed, that they needed to be crated. Like all these things were going to be important in kind of putting this traveling exhibition that will go, you know, across internationally and domestically in terms of in the United States. And so for me, I added that into my budget because I knew that the grant asked for my marketing plan in terms of how I was going to get the work out into the world. Now, if it's not asking for that, if the grant's just asking for how do you create this particular proposal, then I would not include that information in there if it's not asking. And I think that's why reading the guidelines is so important. Now, let's just say this. Let's say there's a grant that doesn't ask for a budget, right? There's just no budget. It's just you get this money and you get an opportunity to do this project. I would still keep the receipts of everything I did, just like the organization asked me, even if they didn't ask me to do it. I would still keep literally the receipts, because when you're doing your taxes at the end of the year, you need to know what you can write off. And so I would keep track of my mileage. I would keep track of my dinners and what I ate. I would keep track of all the gear I bought with the $5,000 grant that I received, because when you're doing your taxes at the end of the year, you want those write-offs, right? So that's another thing to think about, because some grants don't ask for budgets, and then also thinking you're going to have to pay taxes on this money too. And some granting organizations include the money that will be taxed. Like say they include that as well, so you don't have to worry about paying taxes on the money, but that is far and few. That doesn't happen all the time. So I would say make sure that you keep a track for yourself, so at the end of the year when you do your taxes and you have to pay taxes on that money, you'll know where that money went. So I would do it for myself even if the granting organization didn't ask me to. Yeah.
That's excellent, excellent advice. Okay, final piece. I'm just gonna leave it up to you. What is the one thing that you would tell our Alpha Female Plus program applicants today for advice for how to approach it?
Apply. That's what I would say. And if you don't get it, guess what? That is okay, okay? Because think about it this way. You're submitting your work. Someone amazing is looking at your work, right? They're getting an introduction to who you are, what you're trying to say, and what you're doing. So regardless of whether you don't get the grant, you are allowing your work to be in the world. You're allowing individuals to look at it, to judge it, to give feedback about it. And that in itself is important. And you will never believe how many people have applied for things. I remember I applied for my first grant and I didn't get it. But that's because I didn't know what I was doing. Literally, I didn't know what I was doing. And I think, the granting organization gave me some feedback back. I think the grant might have been for $2,000, right? I just wanted to buy a camera. I didn't have a camera at the time, and I was trying to figure out, I was renting cameras. And, and so I applied. I didn't get it. I applied the next year. Guess what? I didn't get it. I applied the third year and I got it, and I bought my first camera, and it was so amazing because I didn't have to rent gear anymore. And so I would say apply, apply, apply. Practice makes permanent. The more you do it, the better you'll get. And one day you might get that $500,000 or $100,000 grant that you're applying for. But literally doing that practice and working through it is going to get you to that level of success for sure.
That is a masterclass right there. Thank you so much, India. Stick around.
Awesome.
I'm going to answer some questions about the program later for everybody who's still with us. But thank you. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for sharing all this knowledge. You are absolutely amazing and inspiring, and we are just really lucky to have you in our family. So thanks for doing this.
Awesome. Thank you, Michaela. I appreciate it for sure.
All right. See you next time. Okay, everyone, we're going to take 2 minutes here. I saw some questions coming through specifically about the grant. So I would like to answer them because you've asked them, and we can go through them very quickly. So let me start here at the top. I'm looking down at my screen, which is why you're seeing me do this. Question from Tia. If I'm creating a film, do I need to attach a script to the grant application? The answer is no. And to tag on to that, there was a question later on about specifically filmmakers. Is this grant only for photographers or filmmakers? Also from Tia. And the answer is for both. But know that the budget is $5,000 in cash. You also get the gear to shoot with. So that would mean that it would probably be a short that you would be doing. And also you have a limited amount of time to do it, 4 to 5 weeks. So take all those things into consideration. If you're applying, you obviously wouldn't be able to apply for sort of full-length film. What if you're at the beginning of your career and you don't have all the items necessary to apply? I think that's perfectly fine. Work on getting all the application elements, and you're going to be okay. The application is pretty simple. Go to the site and you will see it. So you have nothing to worry about there. And then Zuki's asking, do aspiring photographers have a chance? Is it realistic to apply? Absolutely. Yes. Everyone who wants to do this for a living, who is looking to create work that furthers the female and minority perspective in photography and in videography, is welcome to apply. Everyone has a chance. That's why we opened it up. So as long as you fulfill the other criteria listed in our official rules, then you're good to go and you should apply. And let's see. Is it imperative for a grant to have sample photos of the project you are proposing? India addressed this a little bit as well. If you don't have photos that represent the work you would like to do as part of your Alpha Female project, that's okay. As long as you're submitting photos, you're submitting samples of your work so that we can see kind of your approach and how you're doing things. You can definitely get a lot more details at alphauniverse.com/alphafemale. Everything is in there. Check out the official rules. You'll actually get every single detail about what you need. As India said in the beginning, it's really important that you follow the guidelines and you submit everything that you need to have. All of it is listed very nicely there. You will know exactly what you need to do, and you'll have a checklist, so you'll be ready to go. I am a U.S. citizen. I have an idea for a project that takes place outside the U.S. Am I eligible to apply? Yes, you are eligible to apply, but just as India was mentioning earlier about travel, for instance, is it realistic for you to do the project with the budget that we're giving you and with the timeline that you have? And if so, then yes, absolutely, go ahead and apply. And then let's see, final question we're going to take is it possible for a female and male team to apply together on a project? Absolutely. You can apply. We actually had a winning team in the last round where 2 creators worked together to create a film, a short film, and it was wonderful. If you are a team, you can apply regardless of gender, as long as your proposed project is furthering the female and minority perspective, then it is fair game. So Anything that you think would contribute to this body of work that's being created with Alpha Female. And, that comes in a variety of ways. You should apply with that. You should do the thing that you do that makes you most successful. So if you're working in a team, then go for it. You have nothing to lose. So those are the questions. Someone asked, what is the nonprofit grant opportunity? So I just wanted to make sure that I let you know, Roxanne, that is the Create Action Grant. You can find more about it on alphauniverse.com as well. It's a grant for $50,000 in cash and $50,000 in Sony gear for an organization that does various things of note in their community, that works on social justice projects, entrepreneurship, that's really working on making their community better. So if you are part of an organization like that, or you know one, or you have a friend who works in one, please send them this opportunity. It's a really great one, and we already have 2 amazing organizations that have won. We have 8 more to go there as well. So lots of opportunity ahead. So those are the things that came through as questions. Hope I answered all of them. Obviously, this is going to be an ongoing dialogue. Get the details on the site, and good luck. There's no better time than right now to apply. And you still have until September 5th as the next deadline. So let's put those dates up. If you can, 9/5, the next grant application is due. So you still have a little bit of time to get your stuff ready and submit it. But as India said earlier, the earlier the better. Be early, so don't hesitate. We also have a photo challenge that is going on Instagram every month. The work for that is due on the 12th of September, and that follows closely the winner that's working on their project this month. So this month's theme is macro, to go along with Hannah's project, who won the grant, who's working on her grant right now. And then the next workshop that we have is on the 28th of September with Coco Perry. So sign up for that one when it comes out. And that's it. Follow us on Instagram at Sony Alpha Female. Please join the Sony Alpha Female Facebook group if you haven't yet. We have a really amazing community there who helps each other and inspires and is really welcoming, and you would get a lot out of it. So if you're not there, be there. And of course, as I mentioned 1,000 times so far, alphauniverse.com/alphafemale is the hub, is your place for information, inspiration. You will find all the previous workshops there. We will post India's workshop there as well, for those of you who want to rewatch. And looking forward to seeing your applications, and looking forward to seeing you in the group. And hopefully at some point in the future, we'll also get together at some event soon. So thank you for being here. Thank you for always being with Alpha Female, for the support. And we will see you next time.